September 15, 2017, NASA programmed a spacecraft to fly directly into Saturn's atmosphere. Not because the mission failed, because they were afraid of what it had found. Moons with liquid oceans, moons with chemistry, moons that might not be empty, and they could not risk contaminating them with something from Earth. So they killed the machine instead. They called it a controlled disposal. The spacecraft called it nothing. It had already stopped transmitting. That is what Saturn does to things that come too close. It takes them in. It does not give them back. We tell ourselves a comforting lie, that moons are ancient, permanent, eternal. Saturn has been murdering them since before life existed on Earth. Those rings are not ornaments. They are debris, a bright, razor-thin wound wrapped around a giant world, made from ice and stone, and the scattered remains of bodies that drifted too close to Saturn's gravity and were torn apart piece by piece. What we call beauty is often just catastrophe seen from far enough away. Every moon inside Saturn's Roche Limit is already being eaten alive. But most people look at the rings and see geometry, order, something almost mathematical and calm. But calm for whom? The Roche Limit is not a line you can see. It is a sentence carried in gravity, the distance where Saturn stops pulling a moon as one body and starts pulling it apart piece by piece, until rock becomes rubble, and rubble becomes a shining band of ruins around a silent god. What they are actually seeing is the aftermath of a slaughter that is still happening right now. If you were a moon crossing that line right now, you would not feel a sharp break. There would be no explosion, no moment of rupture. You would feel a slow disagreement between what gravity pulls on the side of you facing Saturn and what it pulls on the side facing away. A disagreement so quiet it would take thousands of orbits to become catastrophic. You would keep moving. You would keep orbiting. And the whole time, you would already be coming apart. Saturn holds over 100 moons in its grip right now. Every one of them is already in the ledger. But if the rings are only the wound, what dead thing bled them into the dark? Something the size of a small moon crossed Saturn's Roche Limit and never came back. But most people look at those rings and see a halo, a crown, something ancient and permanent. We look at them and see beauty. We should be seeing a crime scene. What we typically see in planetary systems is not permanence, but wreckage sorted into patterns. Dust spreads, ice collides, gravity combs chaos into shining bands. And Saturn's rings carry that signature too clearly to ignore. What they are actually seeing is a corpse scattered across 282,000 kilometers of silent dark. The leading idea is brutal and simple. A former moon wandered too close, crossed the line where Saturn's pull on its near side and far side no longer matched, and the world began to come apart not in one clean explosion, but in a drawn-out dismemberment. First the crust fractured, then mountains collapsed, then whole regions of ice were pulled free and stretched into a stream of debris that could no longer gather itself back into a single body. And the rings still carry the forensic trace of that death. They are startlingly bright, rich in water ice, far cleaner than you would expect if they had been soaking in cosmic dust since the birth of the solar system. That freshness matters. It hints that this is not some primordial ornament left over from Saturn's formation, but a younger wound, a grave that still looks open, but made of shrapnel. In some places those rings are astonishingly thin, less like a solid disk and more like a wound spread flat across space, a skin of ice fragments circling in disciplined terror. Some pieces are dust, some are house-sized blocks. All of them are trapped in a violent traffic pattern, colliding, scattering, regrouping, forever denied the mercy of becoming whole again. And here is the cruel elegance of it. Saturn did not hide the body. It turned the remains into its most beloved feature, a luminous belt forged from compression, impact, and endless grinding, so that from a distance catastrophe becomes symmetry and slaughter becomes beauty. Except the real killing did not begin at the surface, and if you missed that, the rings make no sense. Tidal forces stretch a moon's core like taffy, pulling the side facing Saturn harder than the side facing away until the rock itself begins to crack from the inside out. On Enceladus, that invisible torture opens tiger stripe wounds near the South Pole, where the ground flexes, heats, and spits towers of water into black space. A moon that should have frozen solid is kept alive by being hurt, kneaded by Saturn until its buried ocean refuses to die. It is not impact, not collision. The moon is doing this to itself because Saturn never stops pulling, never stops kneading, never stops twisting its body out of shape and then letting it relax, over and over, orbit after orbit, until motion becomes heat and heat becomes weakness. This is tidal flexing. Stone bends, ice groans, buried pockets warm, fault lines creep outward like veins under torn skin. If you could stand there, the ground beneath you would not feel dead or solid. It would rise, sink, strain, breathe, and the violence is not only at the surface. Deep below, friction works through the interior like a fever, loosening what once held together, turning a cold, rigid world into something unstable, swollen with internal energy it never asked for. A moon can look serene from afar and still be suffering a slow mechanical torture underneath, its own orbit forcing it to waste itself as heat. But here is the crueler part. The closer a moon drifts, the less it is being held together by its own gravity, and the more Saturn begins to make competing claims on every part of it at once. Backside, cracks widen, structure fails, and at the Roche limit, the invisible execution line, a moon is no longer a moon at all, but debris waiting for permission to separate. But breaking a moon from within is only half the sentence. The other half is quieter, slower, and impossible to escape. The long fall inward that no moon, however solid, is ever allowed to refuse. A moon loses altitude every single orbit, bleeding momentum into the planet below it, and that loss compounds across millions of years until the spiral becomes a plunge. But the cruel twist is this: falling is not always fast. Sometimes death looks like obedience, a moon tracing the same faithful path, while Saturn quietly steals time from it, turning each lap into a smaller cage, each return a little closer to the jaws waiting below. Miss this, and you misread the rings entirely. What looks like decoration is a ledger, and every moon inside the Roche limit is already making a final payment. From far away, the orbit still looks clean, elegant, a pale stone circling a giant lamp in perfect silence. Orbital decay is violence stretched so thin across time that it masquerades as stability. As the moon creeps inward, Saturn's gravity grips harder, the path tightens, the speed rises, and the sky above that moon would begin to warp, the planet swelling larger and larger until it no longer feels like a distant master but a wall, a ceiling, a god taking up half the heavens. If you could watch from the surface of a moon already in decay, Saturn would not look distant. It would not look like a planet at all. It would look like a wall, growing, one orbit at a time. You would not be able to tell that you were falling. That is what makes it cruel. The moon that is dying looks, from the outside, exactly like the moon that is not. And here is the horror hidden inside the math. Getting lower does not save a moon from falling. It feeds the fall. Slow grief becomes mechanical slaughter. The orbit shrinks. Tidal stress rises. Debris sheds. Fragments spread. Some pieces collide and grind themselves to dust. Some are flung outward for a while, only to be hunted down again. Some flatten into bright bands so thin and wide they look delicate, when they are really the scattered remains of a world that once held itself together, circling the planet that taught it how to die. Except some moons can look almost untouched while the death spiral is already eating them alive. And if you trust the surface, you miss the wound. Titan's atmosphere is thicker than Earth's, a warm orange shroud that makes it look protected, almost coddled. Stand on Titan and the sky would not be black but amber, a bruised haze heavy enough to hide Saturn itself. It feels sheltered. It is not. That blanket is leaking away, molecule by molecule, while Enceladus bleeds ice from its striped wounds, feeding space with pieces of its own body. Saturn's magnetic field strips Titan's atmosphere particle by particle. Titan is not sheltered. It is being slowly unwrapped. And the theft is not gentle. Saturn's magnetosphere is a rotating storm of charged particles, a colossal electric wind that sweeps past Titan and snatches at the top of that atmosphere, tearing loose nitrogen and methane and carrying them out into the dark. Enceladus suffers in the opposite way. It is being emptied. From fractures in the ice, water vapor, salts, and organic material blast into space in towering plumes, bright ghost fountains rising from an ocean buried under a frozen shell. Some of that material falls back like pale ash. Some spreads into Saturn's E-ring, turning one moon's internal life into a diffuse halo of debris. They are active wounds. On Titan, the chemistry in that orange air keeps rebuilding complex hydrocarbons even as the upper layers are eroded away, as if the moon is stitching its own skin while the universe keeps cutting it open. On Enceladus, the evidence is even stranger. A hidden sea, a rocky seafloor, heat from within, and tiny grains rich with phosphorus thrown out into space. Ingredients cast from the dark like a message from a world that may be habitable and still is not safe. Life does not spare it. Saturn feeds on what makes these moons most precious: air, water, chemistry. One is skinned from above. One is drained from below. However, if Saturn is only feeding on these moons, why does the whole planet carry a tilt that feels almost like a scar? Saturn leans 26 degrees off its axis, a tilt so precise it looks designed. But astronomers once had no explanation for it, no force large enough to push a planet that massive off its spine. So what moved a giant? Not a passing miracle. A moon. One that may have orbited Saturn for ages, quietly adding its weight to a slow gravitational rhythm with Neptune until the whole planet began to wobble. And when that moon finally vanished, the wound in Saturn's posture remained, a permanent scar written across a world of gas. A destroyed moon did it, its gravitational ghost still pulling Saturn sideways from beyond the grave. Its name was Chrysalis, a moon that may have drifted between Titan and Iapetus. Not spectacular, not famous, just one more body in Saturn's crowded court. But quiet things can move empires. For a long time, Saturn's spin and Neptune's orbit appear to have fallen into a lockstep resonance, a repeated gravitational beat, and Chrysalis helped hold that rhythm in place like a small, crucial tooth inside a planetary machine. Then the machine broke. At some point, Chrysalis was likely knocked onto a new path by the other moons around it. A slight nudge, a changed orbit. That is all the solar system often needs. Once its path became unstable, Saturn's gravity stopped treating it like a child and started treating it like prey. The moon was driven inward, closer and closer, until it crossed the Roche Limit, the invisible execution line where a world is no longer a world, where gravity becomes a butcher and solid rock becomes a stream of wreckage. Part of that wreckage may have vanished into Saturn itself. Part of it may have spread outward into debris. And with Chrysalis gone, the resonance loosened. Saturn did not spring upright again. It stayed wounded, still tilted. And yet if Chrysalis is gone, why does Saturn still wear a halo that looks fresh enough to bleed? Scientists estimate Saturn loses roughly a metric ton of ring material into its atmosphere every second. But most people picture the rings as permanent, ancient, fixed into the sky like a crown that never falls. They are not a crown. They are a countdown. Given enough time, that halo thins. Gaps widen. Bright bands fade into ghost smoke as ice grains rain down and larger chunks grind themselves to dust. In 100 million years, Saturn may wear only a faint scar of light, a dim funeral trace where a blade of frozen debris once burned across the dark. The sky empties. Slowly. Then all at once, the lie is gone. You were never watching a crown. You were watching a body decompose in sunlight. And yet we named them. We gave them names. Pan, Atlas, Prometheus, Pandora, as if naming a thing protects it. As if a name is armor against gravity. It is not. Prometheus is losing material. Pan is thinning. Atlas carries its own debris ridge like a scar it cannot explain. They are all in the ledger. They are all making final payments. What Saturn teaches, if you are willing to hear it, is this: nothing that orbits is safe. Nothing that comes close is permanent. And the most beautiful thing in the solar system is beautiful precisely because it is the evidence of something that could not survive. The rings are a confession, and Saturn has never stopped writing it.